Hi and welcome to Livewire Markets. I'm Mia Kwok and today we're joined by Dawn Kanelleas, the head of Australian small and mid-cap companies for First Sentier Investors. Dawn has been with First Sentier for over 12 years and in that time the fund has consistently outperformed benchmarks with enviable results. Thank you for joining us, Dawn.
Thank you.
So this is an incredible track record that you have built with your team. What do you attribute that success to?
I think it's focusing on the fundamentals and focusing on our philosophy, which is very strong, and we're pretty forensic about applying it to all the companies in our universe, and that is constantly trying to find businesses that have sustainable competitive advantages, strong financials, and if we can find them as much as possible, predictable earnings. Now, obviously, the Australian market doesn't have a plethora of companies with all of those characteristics, and so there are some that are developing or going towards that stage, particularly smaller companies that have listed on the ASX or are developing their business models. But that is our focus, and it means that we're neither value or growth. We're just as likely to find a stock in the value side of the equation that has great assets, has very predictable earnings, but is not growing at spectacular rates, as we are at actually finding a stock with explosive growth opportunities and huge total addressable markets, but which has those characteristics of being able to generate cash flow at some point in the future or currently and be able to reinvest in its business at a very high rate.
Some people would say that the small companies is a bit of a riskier asset class. So what kind of risk appetite would you need to have to sort of tackle these assets?
Yeah, well, obviously our clients determine the amount of risk that we take on, and the ultimate nirvana in all investing is to lower risk as much as possible and maximise return. So we're very risk aware, which is why when we talk about our philosophy, you can see that it probably steers itself towards the higher quality end of businesses that aren't structurally challenged, and businesses that have a terminal value, hence the sustainable competitive advantage. So we're not exploiting short-term dislocations in the market. We're taking long-term views on the businesses that we're investing in. We're partners with them. We're investing our clients' money in those companies.
I wanted to talk about some of your investment philosophy with these stocks. Do you always take a long position in the stocks?
Sometimes we have a strategy which can take a short position. So our long-short strategy is a 130-30 strategy, and we've run that for over a decade very successfully, and it's opportunistic, and it's usually where we see significant downside risks in a business model, whether it's long-term structurally led or whether it's short-term financially led. And that also basically helps us to hone our skills in actually identifying businesses with downside risk, because part of what we do is protect our clients' money, and that is, if you like, a corollary to obviously finding successful businesses is to identify those that you think have significant downside risks and therefore trying to avoid them as much as possible.
Interesting you talking about honing your skills there. You have a very interesting background, so quite a unique background coming from a PhD in organic chemistry, is that right?
That's right, yeah.
Can you tell us a little bit about what skills you took away from that and why the change?
Yeah, I mean, science is about problem solving. And so it's when we take an approach as a team, and most of my team members are quite sciencey in the way that they approach things, even though they might have more commercial degrees through commerce or law. But we all are very similarly wired. And science really, first of all, it's very analytical, which is, something that's very important in terms of what we do. But it's also about solving problems and understanding risks, understanding business models, and it helps to be able to disaggregate businesses if you understand how science works. And also, science is one of the great encouragers of innovation and of thinking out of the box. And that's really important in identifying structural changes that might be occurring in marketplaces and being able to capture them for your clients' interests, and also seeing where downside risks might come through. So trying to understand the actual manufacturing risks that might be present in a company. Or if you're looking at resource companies, which is my area of the market in terms of some of my analyst responsibilities, understanding where the technical risks might lie. So in all of those aspects, science is really beneficial to have that background. It also is an enabler for people who want to think out of the box, for people who are thinking laterally, because you're not successful in science unless you can actually come up with a new idea. Coming up with an idea that other people and being samey as other people is never going to make you a success. So science breeds people who are contrarian by nature, and obviously that feeds in very well to being a successful fund manager over the long term.
How do you create that culture of innovation within your own team?
We create that because it's, first of all, the philosophy creates that, but we have very flat structure, so it's non-hierarchical. Everybody's views are listened to, and there are people in the team who are very lateral, and there are people in the team who are extremely analytical. So we have people on those extremes, and we can blend all of that talent together for our clients' benefit. And that comes through in the way that we pick stocks, in the way that we ask questions of companies to really dig deeply and really ask them, is that sensible? Is what you're saying, does that make sense given the size of the market or given what you've delivered in the past? Can you really achieve a margin like that when you've never achieved that margin in the past? So it makes us very questioning. And all of us have that, we're just naturally wired that way, and I naturally pick people in our team who are wired that way, and so it works really well. And obviously, as I said, there are some who are more lateral and there are some who are hyper analytical, and blending all those skills is very beneficial for our clients.
How do you discern when to make a particular play on a certain company? How do you avoid those disaster stocks that are out there in the world? Well,
we don't always avoid them, obviously, but statistically we have shown that that is the skill that possibly we have better than others, is that we do, on a risk-adjusted basis, our returns are, versus our competition are much higher. And we do that simply by focusing on those aspects that I was talking about. Is this a real business model? Can it actually achieve a level of free cash flow production that it can actually fund its own growth potential? Does it have recurring revenue that it can confidently reinvest in its business? Or is this result that it's just given a one-off, and will it run out of money, and will it not be able to generate those types of returns in the future? And what is the implication of that? Is it a contractor with only 2 or 3 years worth of revenue? How do you value a business like that? Because sometimes the market overvalues businesses like that, even though they don't have a sustainable competitive advantage. And so we tend to sift through businesses on that basis, and that's how we are able ultimately to protect from downside risks.
I'm really interested to know a little bit more about some of your top holdings. So you've got Breville in there as one of your top holdings.
Yeah.
You have News Corp, you have a couple of tech stocks and a rare earths as well. Yeah. Could you take us through maybe some of the fundamentals of one or two of those stocks?
Yeah, obviously Breville is one that we have owned for a long time. Breville quite a few years back, it's a household name. And people have always compared it to Sunbeam, which used to be also part of a listed company called GUD before it was sold. and people were always comparing it on a discretionary basis. But quite a few years back, they went on a pathway of premiumisation of their product. And that involved actually exploiting the fact that here in Sydney, Breville has an R&D centre where it tries to problem solve and innovate in that small domestic appliance space. Now, they made a foray into the US a few years back, and it was successful on the back of juices, where they were frontline in terms of innovation. But it really took hiring a managing director like Jim Clayton, who's the current CEO, to have the global vision and to actually put it together. He recognised that there was something that this business was able to generate, that people were prepared to pay a premium for, and as long as it kept innovating and as long as it kept solving problems in that smaller domestic appliance space. And he came from LG, where he basically created that brand and made it into a premium brand globally from what had previously been a commodity brand or a lower level brand. And so now when we think of LG, we think of it as an innovative, we think of it up there with Samsung as a premium brand. So he created all of that. And he's been now penetrating the US market. He's gone into Europe, and very successful foray into Europe, high growth into Europe. He hasn't entered Asia yet. So China, where premiumisation, the emerging middle class and upper middle class,
huge market.
Huge market. And Breville sells $4,500 coffee machines for people to make coffee at home, the Oracle Touch. So it gives you some idea the level that they're playing at. And really, they're one of the few companies that are focused on that end of the market. In terms of our News Corp investment, part of it was driven by their large investment in REA. Where we had an investment in our small cap fund, but then it transferred into large caps. And so we were no longer able to continue to participate in an investment in REA through a direct investment. But in addition to that, we began to notice that they had actually been able to successfully go into the online world and charge for media, which of course you would be happy to hear. And we were able to see that, for example, the Wall Street Journal, with which they own, was chronically undervalued versus something like the New York Times, which is a listed company in the US. And in fact, News Corp's entire valuation comprised of its shareholding in REA, which of course has a market capitalisation that's listed in Australia and marked to market. So what we saw was the fact that the market was ascribing no value to old school media assets and their printing business, whereas they had successfully migrated to a subscription model, and now they were actually experiencing growth. So the negative growth from that transfer onto online had dissipated, and now they were beginning to see positive growth. But also we were able to use the valuation of New York Times to be able to say, well, there's a valuation for the Wall Street Journal that could be ascribed and is not currently reflected in the valuation.
What a great opportunity, and an unexpected one.
Yeah, that's right.
Fantastic.
And obviously there's the discount factor that's there for the holding by the Murdoch family that you get with all businesses like that. So so those things presented an opportunity for us.
I'm curious to know sort of where the future of some of these stocks and small companies are going. So can you tell us three sort of mega trends that you've identified?
Yeah, look, the major mega trends, I suppose the existential mega trends of the moment, one is of course extremely low interest rates globally, and that makes investing in growth and innovation almost a priority. because that's what everybody's looking for in order to get a return. So that has driven a lot of the rise in the NASDAQ that we've seen, and in growth stocks generally. So that's.
Do you have an example of a stock in that space?
Oh, well, obviously you've had Afterpay, you've had Xero, you've had Altium, except for in most recent times, Technology One. So there's a number of businesses whose multiples have expanded if you like, as a reflection of this low interest rate environment and the market trying to find growth opportunities, of which there are only a few with that sort of level of growth. And Breville is another one, where you have businesses that are exposed to large total addressable markets and are only beginning to penetrate those markets. And obviously the market sees enormous growth potential there, and low interest rates, just encourages that drive of capital into those growth businesses. The other thing that we've seen, and again that feeds into what we just spoke about, is obviously the digital revolution that's occurred, and that's been driven by devices, by all of us having a mobile device, by cloud software opportunities through data centres, and that has proliferated the ability to deliver software on platforms, for us to purchase things online, and all those businesses, that ecosystem actually coming into its own 20 odd years after the dot-com boom. So we're beginning to see the fruits of that now that we have the devices, that we have cloud enabled software. All of those things have come together to enable these businesses to be successful, to be cash flow positive, all of those things that in the past were not possible. And then finally, and possibly most importantly, the existential question that we're all asking is the decarbonisation of the world, and the exciting opportunities that are going to result from that, both from a technological perspective on the battery side. We've seen Tesla in the US, but for Australia, we own the second largest, listed in Australia is the second largest rare earths company. Rare earths are used as magnets in electric vehicles. Lithium is obviously going into the batteries, and we have some of the best spodumene, hard rock, lithium deposits in the world, Greenbushes being one, and we can invest in that through IGO once that transaction is completed, and obviously mineral resources, but there's also nickel, there's copper. All of these raw materials are going to enable this decarbonisation trend that we're going to see for the next 50 years.
Can you elaborate on the connection between these rare earths and how they filter through into a decarbonisation trend?
So rare earths are used, first of all, they're used in windmills, so in windmill technology. They're used in the manufacture of magnets that go into electric vehicles. So the demand for these outstrips supply, and really the largest supplier of these rare earths outside of China is Australia through Lynas Corporation. Hence the fact that you've seen rare earth prices skyrocket. It's because it's a strategic metal, and in terms of Western supply, Australia is in an extremely good position to supply to the world.
These are some of the big trends. Are there some of the under-researched or perhaps now undervalued trends that you're seeing that you could speak to and perhaps give an example about?
Yeah, I mean, certainly you do see that some businesses that are asset rich but are crucial to the economy, such as building materials companies, have come into their own in the last few months as the market sees that their assets are strategic in nature. They might be cyclical, but they will be beneficiaries of the infrastructure spend that we will potentially be getting tonight in the budget. They are, a beneficiary of housing, the strength of the housing market, and they're a general beneficiary of the strength of the Australian economy. And most of them have privileged assets. They were trading on very low multiples. Many of them had very good balance sheets, and they were trading at cyclical earnings lows. So they presented some very good opportunities for investors.
I'm curious to know, you talked about being such an innovative team. Is there a company that is particularly innovative or has inspired you and been one of your favourite finds over the years?
Yeah, I hate to mention it again, but it would have to be Breville, and that's because it was a boring, staid, our grandparents know about Breville. They would have had a Breville kettle probably, the toasting maker.
Yep.
So people don't think about it as a global innovator in a space that a lot of people don't want to dominate. So Dyson is obviously someone who has dominated the bagless vacuum cleaners and made an incredible business and really become a monopoly. But DeLonghi would be the other business that competes with Breville on those premium products. And they're part of a more diversified business. So Breville is the only business in the world that says, I want to own the small domestic appliance space. So if you want to buy a waffle maker that doesn't make as much mess as all the others, we're going to try to figure out how to do that. If you're going to want to make the best coffee you can make as a barista at home, we're going to enable it by creating, good, better, best. So you can buy one that's not as expensive, you can buy one that's a bit more expensive, and then you can buy the bells and whistles at the top. Or you want to be able to make pizza at home and you want a home pizza oven, we're going to design one that can sit on your bench top that will make the best type of pizza in that type of environment.
They really understand the consumer very well, don't they?
Yeah, and solving problems, solving problems for the consumer, and therefore the consumer will be prepared to pay more for the Breville product, because it will give them something in addition to what they've known for the last 100 years, making toast or a toasty maker or boiling water, because, people get very hung up about what temperature they want their coffee or their tea or their herbal tea to be boiled at. So you're enabled to do that now with the technology that they're using in their kettles.
I have heard that Americans don't use kettles to boil water. This is a little bit off topic, but as an aside, I am fascinated by this and very curious to know if Breville has managed to solve that particular. They use the microwave apparently.
Oh, really? One of the things that they have tried to solve is, how Americans like to drink that filter coffee. They have tried to solve exactly what you're saying. How do you keep it hot without actually destroying the flavour of the coffee? And they've discovered the exact temperature that the coffee disaggregates and breaks down. So they've tried to solve that problem for the American consumer. Obviously, in Australia, we don't care because we want a proper coffee.
We care a lot about our coffee.
We don't care about drinking a coffee that's coming out of a filter, but they're focusing on that. And in the German market, where they're very successful, and they recently entered 3 years ago, they've also gone into that market and thought, well, how do they drink coffee? What are the issues with the way that they're making coffee? How can we make it better for them? And therefore charge them more for the product that we're selling them.
It's the beauty of premiumisation.
Yeah, that's right.
I wanted to know a little bit more about yourself, Dawn.
Sure.
So I wanted to chat first about, you have this really interesting philosophy that I discovered, this this balance between the art versus the science. So the science is, you know, your everyday, your work, but the art is this beautiful aesthetic that you obviously connect with. Can you tell me a little bit about that?
Yeah, it's not just visual art. I think you're referring to the one that that was on our website a few years back. It's all sorts of, you know, whether it's writing and reading the latest Booker Prize winner and beautifully written work about, you know, humanity and the human condition. All of those things are very important because it gives you balance with respect to how you think about how you interact with people, how you think about how businesses operate, because businesses operate in the real world. Even though I have a science background, you know, you can't actually create a model for how businesses are going to behave, even though a lot of quantitative fund managers try to and fail miserably sometimes. You know, you can't do that. So it's very important to have a perspective on society and what society is thinking. Because remember, the worst thing that happens is that you own a business that is structurally challenged and that falls apart. So you have to be aware of, you know, people's views on the environment, which are very important, people's views on social interactions. Obviously, the Me Too movement has changed that. And art is a reflection of what is going on in society and where society is moving to. So it's almost 2 steps ahead of the markets that are. So it's my way of keeping ahead of where the market is, because, you know, that's what we're paid to do, but also being aware of the risks of certain businesses, not being aware that, you know, the safety of workers on a site. For example, Ai Wei Wei is a Chinese artist, you know, and he's done a lot of installations where he shows, you know, what happens after earthquakes in China and how perhaps, you know, the safety of some people is not being...
he does a lot of art as protest.
Yeah, a lot of art as protest. And a lot of artists do, because they're reflecting how society is changing. And therefore we as investors have to also be aware of those trends. And they're not so much trends, they're real movements that do change the way that we invest. So for example, decarbonisation that we spoke about, you know, a few years back it was something in the far distance. Well, now it's here. And everybody is, you know, you're seeing it reflected in the share market with the share price of Lynas, with the share price of IGO, with the share price of all the lithium stocks. So you can't ignore it. And art is usually ahead of the pack with respect to actually bringing up some of those social issues before they become investment issues.
Is there a book that you've read recently or even in the past that left a real impact on you?
There are many books that
it's a hard question. I know.
It's a hard question. Most recently, I've been reading an English American writer, Rachel Cusk, and she's written a trilogy. And it's a very interesting examination of people and their social interactions and what motivates people. And how the past and our history, how even philosophy of the past and how ancient historians interpreted some of the reactions that we have to our day-to-day life. So she's a very intellectual writer. And yeah, she's written this trilogy that is absolutely brilliant, that is beautifully written, but also extremely intellectual. So I find that great to go home to and actually bend my mind around some very dense literary ideas. Because that helps you to formulate your own navigation of investment ideas, and it helps you to be very rational in the way that you try to justify or even to understand some of the things that we see in the market.
And education isn't just important for your own mind, but I know that you've been very passionate about giving back to the community and to young people and growing minds. Can you tell us a little bit about charity and the philanthropy of your time?
Yeah, I mean, in the past I have been on the board of a Good Samaritan school, an all-girls school, and I really, really enjoyed that. As we launched our mid-cap fund, my time became a little bit constrained with respect to that. My youngest son volunteers for the Asylum Seeker Centre, which is something that I'm really interested in and hope that maybe I will be able to contribute to. But definitely education of young women in particular is a passion of mine, because I think that's how we move out of poverty globally. It's how women obviously become independent, and some of the social issues that we see being displayed in the media at the moment with respect to the condition of professional women, where those things will change as we get more women in the workforce, more women in predominantly male environments. We get that social change that will make a difference to the world and how it behaves, and the future of the world.
That's really inspiring. Thank you. Well, thank you so much for joining us, Dawn. I really appreciate your time and your insights, and we hope to chat with you again soon.
Thank you.